Good morning, everyone. My name is Ali. I am joined this morning by my colleague Dave Ligler and my other colleague Sarvana Kumar. We're going to talk to you about your journey beyond RPA and how you get started with hyperautomation. In today's conversation, we're going to go through the automation trajectory. Then we're going to talk about why people usually embark on an RPA journey, and then typically what is experienced a few months down the road. Following that, we're going to talk about why hyperautomation is your way forward. And then from that point onwards, we're going to get a little biased. We're going to talk about why you should think about Kissflow. And then we're going to transition the conversation over to Sarvana, who's going to walk you through our platform and demonstrate how Kissflow and any RPA product, be it UiPath or Automation Anywhere or Blue Prism, can be interconnected with Kissflow to automate your end-to-end process or workflow, and which is what enables the hyperautomation journey, if you will. So moving on to our first slide, what exactly is the automation journey? The automation journey starts when a company or an industry or a line of business decides that they need to overhaul their processes, they need to undergo a transformation. And usually one of the fastest way of doing this is to look at what tasks exist within your organization that are very repeatable in nature, that could use the benefit of being automated through a computer robot or an RPA bot. And then by virtue of that automation exercise, you can create a lot of throughput. And then once that throughput is achieved, what happens next? Now, typically what most people do is they take the next step by automating multiple bots within their organization. And then further after that, they realize that the next step is to automate the process, because RPA is a single bot. Multiple RPAs are multiple robots, if you will, within an organization. And in theory, if you connect multiple robots together, you're automating a process. But the reality is that it's not that straightforward because of a few reasons, both architectural as well as logistic. And we'll go into that a little further down in our conversation. But then beyond RPA, beyond process automation, what happens next? It is hyperautomation. And hyperautomation is when you take advantage of interconnecting multiple technologies, multiple backend systems into a singular function. And that's what becomes your RPA, your hyperautomation journey. So going a step further and looking at our base over here, the pink base, if you will, robotic process automation. What are the reasons for a company to undertake an RPA journey? Usually it's got to do with two or three driving factors. Factor number one is that you want to do more with the existing amount of time that you have. So hypothetically, if an individual is doing a repeatable task, and for the sake of conversation, let's just say that task is, if you were working at a bank and your job was, you were part of, and you worked in the mortgage department, and your job involved, say, credit lookups. Does Ali qualify to get a loan from this institution? Does he have the credit worthiness? What is his income like? What's the consistency of his income? How long has he been working? Well, these are straightforward tests. They're also very repeatable in nature. So instead of a human doing this lookup, and again, for the sake of conversation, saying being able to do maybe 20 or 30 or even 50 or 100 such lookups in a day, because this task is very routine in nature, you can employ a software robot or an RPA bot to do this work for you. And what a human can do in a day, a robot can do in minutes. So it makes a lot of sense to take tasks like these that are repeatable, have a very direct outcome, and automate these tasks. Because what happens is you now create throughput. And whereas you would be able to process, say, 30 applications or 100 applications using humans in a day, you can now process 100 applications or 100 lookups within minutes, if not seconds. Um, so that's one reason. The second reason is because bots are relatively quick to employ, you can get your output relatively fast as well. So it takes you a week, maybe 2 weeks, to get a bot, the analysis done on a bot and the building of it, and within say a week and a half to two, you put that bot in production, and very quickly you've seen your productivity go up. This naturally makes you want to start automating more bots within the organization. And at various points in time, let's just go back again to that mortgage workflow, my mortgage application workflow. You look for other points within that workflow that can benefit from such automations to create that throughput. And typically, what happens is the rate at which you can process loans or mortgage applications, and the rate at which you can lend money, and in other words, generate more income for your department, goes up dramatically. But here is a factor that's somewhat overlooked, and that is while you are automating these bots, you're really just automating individual tasks. And as you go down this process, the first question that'll come up pretty quickly is, let's just say this was our line, this was our process line, and at this process line you had various points where you employ robots. So what happens is you're going down the process, you hit a bot, the pace just picks up dramatically, you get a lot of throughput, a lot of value. Once you cross that bot, it comes back down to that line again. You go to another point in the process and you get that expansion again, you get a lot of throughput, and once again you're back down to the bottleneck. So while these individual tasks create efficiencies for you, are they really automating the process? So the question becomes, are we really talking about task automation, or are we talking about process automation? The reality is it's task automation, and no matter how many individual tasks you automate, you're not really going to get that throughput, which leads us to looking at an automation journey. And there's a couple of scenarios that apply at this point. And those scenarios are that you start off by creating a series of bots. You ended up creating too many bots. And then what happens is, as you gain these efficiencies, you start looking back and seeing, hey, you know what? I think this bot could work a little better, or maybe it wasn't giving you the right output that you wanted as a consequence of that automation. You go back to maintain it. And what happens is the throughput that you received now starts to go down because you're spending time in bot maintenance. Another scenario is that the business growth is so high that you're not able to keep up with the numbers of bots, but you feel that because you have employed a couple of bots, you've, well, not really a couple, but at this point, several hundreds of robots in your organization, that you've gained some throughput. But you realize pretty quickly that the rate at which you're out building these bots is not the same as the rate at which your business is beginning to progress. So you'd start, and then comes in the maintenance cycle as well. So you start to experience this concept called bot fatigue, where not only are the people responsible for building the bots getting into a routine where there's fatigue because they continue to look at how many bots need to be employed, but the bots that have been built in the past require maintenance, both from a function perspective, as well as just typically determining how many robots you have in your organization and ensuring that they're all functioning correctly, that the output from them is consistent with what the business requires, and then that causes business to slow down. So, what is bot fatigue? It's a phenomenon that occurs when bot value diminishes, and the resulting efficiency also goes down because you spend more time in bot maintenance, bot repair, and bot offlining versus taking advantage of automating processes. So this leads us to the next step in this journey, which is going from task automation to process automation. You quickly say to yourself, hey, you know what? Let's talk about um, the next evolution of our journey. But before we get there, we've arrived at our first poll question, and that is, what is the biggest challenge you faced when implementing or scaling your RPA? So we'll give you guys about 20 seconds to look through this. Would love for some answers from you. Then we'll see what most of you guys think. Then we'll continue with the conversation. So that's a great response over there. It looks like a lot of folks have come up with pretty much what we've discovered as well, that identifying tasks for automation usually tends to be the biggest um, area of confusion, if you will. What do you automate next? So instead of automating tasks, it kind of makes sense that we automate the process instead. So what is next? Are we going to start to try and fix everything that we've done so far? Are we going to find, as the graphic says, more tasks to automate? Where should you spend your time? And are you even saving any money as a consequence of all the automations that you've undertaken? It's a fair question. But the next step over here is to start thinking bigger, start imagining bigger, and to start automating bigger. And the two things to think about at this point is, how do you take the next step? Where does RPA work? Where does it not work? Where does hyperautomation kick in? And what should you consider in order to scale up your automation from task automation to process automation? So what's RPA, and what's the fundamental difference between RPA and task automation and process automation? Let's start by looking at the architecture. Now, as I've mentioned before, when it comes to tasks, you're looking at vertical automation. What you're doing is that repeatable tasks. This is vertical, so you're talking about that repeatability over and over again. Automation of individual tasks. You don't have functionality like SLA that over a certain period of time, after a certain point in time, this should be kicked off to the next step, et cetera, et cetera. And then in addition to individually automating those tasks, what other technologies can you employ? What other mechanisms like event-based timing, SLAs, business rule-based routing, these kind of things do not apply to task automation. So that allows us to start thinking about the hyper-automation journey. And then things like other technologies within your organization. Do you have AI? Do you have a separate chatbot? To interact with your customers? What does your CRM look like? How many databases do you need to connect to in the back end? What ERP systems do you have in place? Should the workflow touch all of these back-end systems as well? Thinking about that allows you to start thinking bigger, imagining bigger tasks that require automation, and then going ahead and automating those bigger tasks. And that's when you get to technologies like Kissflow. But beyond that, just a quick recap. What is hyperautomation, and why is that the way forward? So we're talking about thinking beyond RPA. So that leads us to the hyperautomation conversation. Hyperautomation is a combination of similarly minded technologies that result in a cohesive workflow across an enterprise. So stringing together a bunch of bots, automating that entire workflow, or automating that entire process in combination with similar automation technologies is what is the definition for hyperautomation in order to avoid bottlenecks in your organization. So another way of looking at this is a graphical representation of that exact phenomenon that I just described. You see point A through point E being a process. That's your hyperautomation journey. Along those lines, you can employ 1 to 300, or however many robots you might want. You can employ AI. You can use business rules to decide which direction of the workflow that needs to happen. Another thing that factors into this, right, is when you're talking about RPA versus process orchestration, you don't really have the benefit of figuring out what happens if something goes wrong. If a bot does not give you the right output, what do you do? If a certain event does not happen, where does the workflow go? If your AI is simply not giving you the output that you want, or it's malfunctioning, what do you do? So being able to address all those non-happy path scenarios is also a critical aspect of your decision making when you start to think about going beyond task automation. So that leads us to our second poll question. Which area of your organization would benefit most from hyperautomation? So we'll give you about 15 seconds to mull over this, and then we'll go forward. So Dave, let's see what our results are like. Yeah, kind of makes sense. Backend office functions, or what Kissflow likes to describe as the messy middle, is a fantastic area to think about. And this is kind of the perfect segue to our next slide, which is hyperautomation is the next direction for digital transformation, and then that leads us into more of a statement, really. Hyperautomation is the next step of digital transformation after an organization has reaped the benefits of RPA. So that takes us fantastically to the next slide. Who are we? This is where the pitch starts. So now the sales hat comes on. Who is Kissflow? What do we do? Kissflow is a SaaS hyperautomation slash process orchestration platform built on the Google Cloud. We're a single platform. We have presence in 160 countries. We have over 10,000 customers and over 1 million users. So that's pretty exciting if you think about it, for a company and a product that's only been around about 7 odd years. Company's been around 17. The product and the platform has been around for 7 years, but we've done pretty well in that period of time. And this slide talks about brands that trust Kissflow. Some names that I think will resonate with everybody are Philips, Deloitte, Casio. Does anybody still wear a Casio watch? I don't know. But I'll bet you every single one of you goes and gets a Slurpee from 7-Eleven. So at least, hey, I know that my Slurpee is powered by Kissflow. Kissflow flavored Slurpees. Now, here's the question. What is Kissflow? What is our platform? It's a low-code, no-code platform. It consists of 3 layers. Layer number 1 is our top layer, which focuses on our key functionality. You have case management functionality, you have process automation capability, and you have app development capability. And then on the layer below that, you have collaboration, meaning that you can interact with anybody anywhere that's using Kissflow. We have a pretty robust integration protocol, and we can build reports and give you analytics on how your processes are doing, which means that the platform can guide you as to what the next evolution of your workflow is, which is pretty powerful. Because if we as a platform start to analyze the workflows that you put in, we can tell you what areas are working well, what areas are working slow, gives you great insight into how your process can evolve, and as a consequence, your business can evolve. But more specifically, these functions allow you to address that messy middle that we talked about, the back office operations, which differ from business to business, where the problems are unique to the business in itself, and there's no existing package or platform out there that can resolve that. Now, the third part of this, I think, is going to be pretty interesting to all of you, and that is the generative AI, the App Store, and the portal aspect. Portals are pretty self-explanatory, but in our App Store, it's pretty interesting because you have what we call pre-built solutions. Now, you as a user can go in there and kick off any of your existing work based off of a solution that we've already built, or you can build something of your own. Say you have a brilliant idea, you can build it on in our App Store and for the enterprise, and people can buy it off of you. And then, of course, generative AI. This is a pretty exciting piece, and I think we'll do a webinar in the near future on that specifically. But you can literally write sentences, paragraphs in English, and the platform will build the workflow for you. So, but another way of looking at this is exactly how does Kissflow function? What does a workflow look like? What constitutes an end-to-end enterprise solution? Now, typically, it might look very linear, right? But what every workflow, what every process in an organization results in is these 7 areas that function cohesively together in order to automate a function in that messy middle area, if you will. And Kissflow effectively is the very, very top layer, which is the orchestration layer. So what that means is we ensure that we allow you to connect all of your backend systems, all of your software products within an organization in a way that allows you to consistently analyze, define, and optimize your business. And being able to rapidly build that orchestration layer, build that workflow is, what results in a seamless, efficient business. Another way of looking at it, which I don't know if this is the right example, but I'll try it out on you guys, right? Think of it as the path of least resistance. If you had I think many people have seen those videos in documentaries where you see water coming down a hill, if you will, and it tends to trickle down the path of least resistance to its conclusion. And that effectively is what Kissflow allows you to do. It allows you to start a process and end it to its most optimal output point, you taking the path of least resistance. Furthermore, you can also define what that path needs to be like. If it needs to go a certain way, you can use an orchestration technology like ours to guide the process in a very defined manner. You can also ensure that you look at all the happy paths, the alternate paths, business logic, business rules, backend systems, what needs to be written to, where data needs to be extracted from using our platform. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to give you a few examples of where Kissflow has done really well. And I'm going to ask my friend and colleague, David, to talk about some of this. Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Aali. Appreciate it. So the case study that we have here today is Mattel, and the highlights that they have over 10,000 employees utilizing Kissflow, $2 billion in revenue as an organization. But really the processes that we are helping them with are leave requests, intercompany cash transfers, HOR terminations, P2P issue resolutions, things of that nature. And we're able to go ahead and give them a 10x ROI, which is why you could go back to that initial slide and you have all of those brands that trust us is because of that quick time to value and that ROI that we're able to deliver upon. So from this point forward, we're going to turn it over to SK real quick to go through a demo of the solution so everybody can actually see and feel what Kissflow looks like. So SK, over to you.
Hey, David. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Since we're talking about RPA and Kissflow, I want to talk about one of our customers who uses RPA and Kissflow and achieved hyperautomation. So let me share my screen, but while I do that, I also wanted to give you guys a quick backstory. David, you might have to stop sharing the screen so that I can. Fantastic, thank you. So the backstory is that the customer used an email inbox for about a decade to receive invoices from their vendors. This is a fairly simple process, but again, complex from the business standpoint. And every time a vendor needs to get a payment for an invoice, they just send out an email to this inbox. And for about a decade, even before RPA, they had a team who would go through this inbox, copy paste the invoice details into a Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet, and then would forward to the respective account team, and then the approval happens and then forwarded by to the payment processing. The whole process was completely manual, and with the RPA identification, they created a few bots which would crawl into these documents, which would crawl into these invoices and kind of consolidates into an Excel sheet. They kind of automated about 50% of the process. They eliminated the manual task of repeatedly copy pasting into a spreadsheet, but then the overall process of routing from one step to another, right? They receive about 50 to 100 invoices every single day, and it goes through different users, different account owners based on the type of invoice, based on the type of products and the values. And they've been using email and forwarded the spreadsheet, and it kind of worked okay in an ideal scenario, which is like 10%, and then the remaining 90%, it's chaos. There's no tracking, there's no way to follow up. And what if one of the invoices is incorrect, right? And in terms of processing the payment, they had to again use an Excel spreadsheet where somebody has to manually go through that, makes the check, and then forward it to the payment. Now, for today, the present state is that they use RPA and Kissflow together, and the only only time somebody has to intercept or get into the process is for them to approve a specific request, and that's required because it involves dollars and money. And let's go ahead and see how the process works. You should be able to see my screen. Do you?
We can see it. That's it. Yes.
Awesome. All right. Just to demonstrate the setup that the customer have. This is kind of a similar one that I have. So they had a RPA which would actually receives invoices in an email inbox, and there are different ways they receive it. They receive it in a Google Drive or they receive it in an email, but the concept is they just get it from an external user through this inboxes or drives, and the RPA would just crawl it into the document and then sort of pushes it into a Google spreadsheet, consolidated it. But now they don't use a Google Sheet anymore. They use webhooks called, it's going to export it into an API. And this is fairly, I mean, this is almost available in every RPA tool out there. What it does is it reads the invoice information and pushes it into an API, a JSON data or an XML, whichever that's possible with the RPA. And Kissflow has the capability to read this webhook, which is fantastic because once you gather the information, it doesn't matter how complex the process is. Kissflow is really good at routing the process, and we'll see how complex the customer process is in a bit. But I'm going to walk you through how they actually use it in terms of the real time, the vendor submitting the invoice to the inbox, and then how they receive the payment. Right. All right. So I have this workflow set up, and imagine this: they used email to completely wrote their entire process. But today, moving forward into Kissflow's tool, anytime an invoice is submitted, it creates a process in Kissflow and it automatically goes to the account identification team to select what account they need. And that's kind of the only time they need to manually provide some input. And from there, the system would automatically route it to the respective branches. And as you can see here, this is a similar one. They had an even complex one, but just for the purpose of demo, I built this. I've kind of replicated it. As it moves into that, like the condition that I showed before, they had a matrix kind of approval mechanism. And in order to set that up, it's pretty simple. You hit a new approval step, and you just map the data set and say that it has to go to respective approvals based on the account number that's been chosen. And writing the condition is also pretty simple. If the total value is between 500 to 2,500, it's going to go to the specific condition and it's going to execute the approval. Otherwise, it's going to skip it. Right after somebody selects the account number and identifies it, it's going to go forward for the payment because the value is less and it doesn't require too many input, right? And it also comes with SLAs and deadlines, and which you can configure. But the demo is more on showing the routing, right? Now, after that, it's going to go to the financial admin approval and followed by the payment kickoff. Now, once the financial admin approves it, it automatically creates a payment in your accounts payable system. Now, the customer uses QuickBooks, so if you use any other system, Kissflow is fairly easy to integrate with that. We have connectors, we have APIs to achieve that. And I'm going to switch tabs and see. Yep, there we go. So this is the invoice that I just submitted. I've got a $2,300 invoice that's sitting over here. Now, when I open up, you can see that here, right? It has everything from the invoice. It's got the invoice number. It's got the list of items that's on the invoice and the total invoice value. Right now, all I need to do is I can take a look at why it's with me. It's with me because I need to identify the account. So I'll just quickly take a look at that, what the department is, what the item types are, and then I'll go ahead and choose respective account number, right? And once I do that, I can go ahead and hit submit. And what happens next is Kissflow will identify who is the respective account owner and what is the threshold it's between. We see that it's between 500 and 2,500. So it's going to put this in the respective matrix cell for them to approve. Right. So it's with me because for the demo, it's come back to me. But this is how it works. When I expand the workflow, you'd be able to see what really goes under the hood. After somebody chooses the account identification, it identifies that this is a serviced invoice, and it automatically moved into the L1 approval because it's between 500 and 2,500, and I can see the ETA when I need to approve and all that stuff. And let's say if I need a little more clarification saying that this invoice doesn't belong to my account, right? I can use send back option to send it back to the accounts team to map the right account number, or I can send, if it's right, I can just go ahead and approve it. But this is simply not possible if you're using just an RPA and an email routing mechanism, right? You have no way to follow up, you have no way to track it, you have no way to send back, especially if you're consolidating and sending it. That's not possible. Now, when I approve it, it's going to go ahead for the financial approval. Anyway, the idea is that as it moves forward, once everybody approves, it then kicks off a payment request in your accounting system. Now, how is that possible? How does Kissflow do that? I'm going to walk you through a simple integration, showing how it can work with accounts software. For the demo, I'm going to be using QuickBooks, and that's available as a connector. Now, imagine this, right? We have this invoice process. Now, the scenario is once it is approved, once everybody approves, and it has to be processed of the payment, that's the trigger. Once a process completes its workflow, we're going to be choosing the process, saying that when an invoice approval process completes its workflow internally, that means everybody has approved it. Now it's time to process the payment to the vendor, right? There's easy ways. There are so many connectors. I'm going to use QuickBooks today, and there's Expensify. And what I can do is I can go ahead, create a new payment. So if you have your QuickBooks, or if you use Expensify or any other systems out there, this is how you do it. We have connectors and API endpoints. You just choose your account. So you have the hyper automation. So the only time somebody has to intervene is that to approve the process. Right from vendor submitting the invoice to receiving the payment, it's all seamlessly automated, and that's what the hyper automation totally means. Now, David, I'm done with my demo. I think we have about 18 minutes. Should we leave some time for the Q&A?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, SK, for taking us through the demo. Now, if there's any questions, we'd be more than happy to take any questions right now. Let's see, we have a couple in here. So SK, is bot fatigue inevitable? Is the first question. You want to take that, SK?
Is Aali still here? Or
Ali's
maybe
not.
you can take
No,
it.
he's not. So yeah, I'll take it. No worries. So bot fatigue, while it's inevitable, at some point in time, the reason that a bot becomes a little bit less productive, if you will, is that you look at your business and the processes, right? And they're ever evolving. Your business isn't staying the same from day to day or from month to month or year to year. So once your processes or the task changes, then that bot is going to fatigue. It's going to start being, less productive, increase the errors. It's going to have some performance degradation that's going to come with those changes in the business, which that change in the business is inevitable. So therefore, that bot fatigue then at the end of the day would be inevitable as the businesses change.
Right.
So let's see, we have one more question here from Michael. What do we do in case we've not started an RPA journey, SK? Where would you start? Where should they be looking?
I think if you haven't started the RPA journey, the good way to start is look at the automation of the process and see how a process automation actually works in your organization. Identify the steps of the process and see wherever you can introduce the workflow automation and orchestrating all the other tools out there, and then you introduce RPA. I think that's the way to start. If you've started RPA, that's good. If you haven't, the initial way is to look at the process automation, where you can orchestrate your whole flow, and then you connect RPA if needed. Otherwise, even you can achieve our hyper automation even without an RPA.
Great, thank you, SK. That looks like all of the questions for now. Oh, we have one more coming in. Can it collaborate with multiple bots?
I think I'll take that, David. It can. So like I said before, it doesn't matter how many bots you create. The customer I was talking about, they have about 50 processes that's built in Kissflow, and they have about more than 10 to 15 bots that's built in RPA, and these are working seamlessly, and it's totally possible.
Thank you for that, SK. Now, final question here. Can you explain the point of diminished returns and if it's avoidable at all? And now I assume that that is in reference to the bot fatigue that we were speaking of. So I hope I'm answering this correctly. But is it avoidable? The only way that you're really looking at the bot fatigue being unavoidable is if your processes don't change, right? If the business is stagnant and staying the same and not moving with different processes. So if everything's staying the same, if that process stays the same, then the bot will not fatigue over time as long as it's keeping at the same volume and keeping with the same process, right? But once the business starts to change, you add any volume, you add any different steps in the process, then yes, it will start to diminish.
Yes, we would love to do that. I can set up a demo. Would be nice if you can share the email address or who you are. Yeah, we've got one more poll. David, can you open up?
Yeah. So, can Kissflow solve a problem for you? Would we like a demo? Give them a couple minutes or a couple seconds to answer that. And yes, it looks like we do have a lot of want for a demo. So we would love to get some information from you, be able to reach out to you guys and set up those demos. And we'll be reaching out to the individuals after the session to go ahead and get that set up. But as of right now, it looks like we are out of questions and close to time here. Are there any final questions before SK and I depart? Nope. All right, guys. I appreciate everybody's time today. SK, thank you so much for the demo. And Aali, since he had to leave, we appreciate him running through the deck for us. So if there's any questions, comments, please feel free to reach out to us as always. We appreciate everyone's time. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, David. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.